Ideas that shaped Darwin's thinking. How old is the Earth? By Darwin's time, the relatively new science of geology was providing evidence to support new and different ideas about Earth's history. Geologists James Hutton and Charles Lyell formed hypotheses based on the work of other researchers and on evidence they uncovered themselves. Hutton and Lyell hypothesized that the Earth is extremely old, and they hypothesized that the processes that changed Earth in the past are the same processes that operate in the present. Hutton recognized that the connections between a number of geological processes and geological features, like mountains, valleys, and layers of rock that seemed to be bent or folded, indicated some violent geological action. He realized, for example, that certain kinds of rocks are formed from molten lava. Hutton also realized that some other kinds of rocks form as sediments and are squeezed into layers. Some theorize that rock layers in the Grand Canyon region were laid down over millions of years, and the Colorado River formed a channel where it now flows. But what about weathering? Would the rocks at the top be round and worn with gradual slopes at the top from many years of rain and wind and animal traffic? We see the rock weathered the same at the top and the bottom of the canyon, and a sharp, relatively even, narrow canyon wall. How is this explained? Hutton also proposed the forces beneath the Earth's surface can push rock layers upward, tilting and twisting them in the process and forming mountain ranges. Mountains, in turn, in the weathering, can be worn down by rain, wind, heat, and cold. Since some of these processes operate slowly, Hutton surmised that our planet must be much older than a few thousand years, unless it had experienced traumatic events, which meteor craters indicate. Hutton introduced a theoretical concept called deep time, the idea that our planet's history stretches back over a period of time so long that it is difficult for the human mind to imagine. Lyell presented a way of thinking called uniformitarianism, the idea that geological processes we see in action today must be the same ones that shaped Earth years ago. Ancient volcanoes are assumed to have released lava and gases, just as volcanoes do now. Ancient rivers are assumed to have slowly dug channels and carved canyons in the past, just as they do now. Lyell's theories, like those of Hutton, relied on there being enough time in Earth's history for these changes to take place. Like Hutton, Lyell argued that the Earth was much, much older than a few thousand years. Otherwise, how would a river have enough time to carve out a valley? This woodcut from Lyell's Principles of Geology shows geological features near Italy's Mount Etna. Among them is a deep channel labeled B, carved into a bed of lava. Lyell's work helped Darwin appreciate the significance of an earthquake he witnessed in South America. The quake was so strong that it lifted a stretch of rocky shoreline more than 3 meters out of the sea, with mussels and other sea animals clinging to it. Sometime later, Darwin observed fossils of marine animals in mountains thousands of feet above sea level. Darwin realized that he had seen evidence that Lyell's theory might be correct. Geological events like the earthquake, if repeated many times over many years, could build South America's Andes Mountains a few feet at a time. Rocks that had once been beneath the sea could be pushed up into mountains. Darwin asked himself, if Earth can change over time, could life change over Hutton's theoretical deep time too? Do species evolve? Throughout the 18th century, a growing collection of arrangement of fossil records were organized into a theory that life somehow evolved. In 1809, the French nationalist Jean-Baptiste de Lamarck proposed the hypothesis that organisms could change during their lifetimes by selectively using or not using various parts of their bodies. He also suggested that individuals could pass these acquired traits on to their offspring, enabling species to change over time. Lamarck proposed that all organisms have an inborn urge to become more complex and perfect, and to change and acquire features that help them live more successfully in their environments. Lamarck thought that organisms could change the size and shape of their organs by using their bodies in new ways. For example, a black-necked stilt could have acquired long legs because it began to wade in deeper water looking for food. As the bird tried to stay above the water's surface, its legs would grow a little longer. Structures of individual organisms could also change if they were not used. If a bird stopped using its wings to fly, for example, its wings would become smaller. Traits altered by an individual organism during its life are called acquired characteristics. Lamarck also suggests that a bird that acquired a trait like longer legs during its lifetime could pass these traits on to its offspring, a principle referred to as inheritance of acquired characteristics. Thus, over a few generations, birds like the black-necked stilt could evolve longer and longer legs. Today, we know that Lamarck's hypotheses were incorrect in several ways. Organisms don't have an inborn drive to become more perfect. Evolution does not mean that over time a species becomes better somehow, and evolution does not progress in a predetermined direction. In addition, traits acquired by individuals during their lifetime cannot be passed on to offspring. However, Lamarck was one of the first naturalists to suggest that species are not fixed. He was among the first to try to explain evolution scientifically using natural processes. He also recognized that there is a link between an organism's environment and its body structures. How many people can live on Earth? In 1798, English economist Thomas Malthus noted that humans were being born faster than people were dying, causing overcrowding. This 19th century engraving shows the crowded conditions in London during Darwin's time. The forces that work against population growth, Malthus suggested, included war, famine, and disease. He reasoned that if human population grew unchecked, there wouldn't be enough living space and food for everyone. Darwin realized that Malthus's reasoning applied even more to other organisms than it did to humans. An oak tree can produce thousands of seeds each summer. One oyster can produce millions of eggs each year. However, most offspring die before reaching maturity, and only a few of those that survive manage to reproduce. Darwin believed that species evolved, but he needed a scientific explanation based on a natural process to explain how and why evolution is a good explanation for life on Earth. When Darwin realized that most organisms don't survive and reproduce, he wondered which individuals survive and why. To find an explanation for change in nature, Darwin studied change produced by plant and animal breeders. Breeders knew that individual organisms vary and that some of these variations could be passed from parent to offspring and used to improve crops and livestock. For example, farmers would select for breeding only trees that produced the largest fruit or cows that produced the most milk. Over time, this selective breeding would produce trees with even bigger fruit and cows that gave even more milk. Darwin called this selective breeding process artificial selection, a process in which nature provides these variations and humans select those they find useful. Darwin put artificial selection to the test by raising and breeding plants and fancy pigeon varieties. Darwin had no idea how heredity worked and what caused heritable variation, but he did know that variation occurs in wild species as well as in domesticated plants and animals. Before Darwin, scientists thought variations among individuals in nature were simply minor defects. Darwin recognized that natural variation was very important because it provided the raw material for natural selection.